Every brand has a beginning. Most people only know the ending. Nike feels inevitable now. The swoosh appears on stadium banners, streetwear, Olympic podiums. Just do it sounds less like a slogan and more like a universal instruction. But Nike did not begin with inevitability. It began with a young man who was unsure whether his idea would survive a single shipment. In the late 1950s, Phil Knight was not a business visionary in the public sense. He was a middle-distance runner at the University of Oregon. He was competitive, but not elite. What stayed with him after races was not the applause, it was the question. Why were the best running shoes coming from Germany? Adidas dominated performance footwear at the time. German craftsmanship had earned trust among serious athletes. Meanwhile, Japan was rebuilding its industrial base after the war. Japanese cameras and electronics were gaining global respect, but running shoes were not yet part of that conversation. At Stanford Business School, Knight wrote a paper proposing that high-quality, lower-cost Japanese shoes could compete with established European brands. It was an academic theory, a thought experiment. After graduation, he did something less theoretical. He traveled to Japan. In 1962, Knight met with executives from Onitsuka Tiger and Kobe. When they asked which company he represented in the United States, he introduced one that barely existed: Blue Ribbon Sports. There was no infrastructure, no employees, no warehouse, only intention. To his surprise, he secured a distribution agreement. The first shipment of shoes did not arrive immediately. Months passed. When the boxes finally came, Knight stored them in the trunk of his Plymouth Valiant. He drove to track meets across the Pacific Northwest and sold them directly to runners. There were no marketing campaigns, no brand positioning strategy, only conversation. One of the first people he approached was his former coach, Bill Bowerman. Bowerman was obsessive in a way that bordered on restless. He cut apart shoes from competitors to understand their construction. He believed every ounce mattered, every seam could be improved. If Knight carried ambition, Bowerman carried experimentation. The partnership worked at first. Blue Ribbon Sports grew steadily through word of mouth among serious runners. The Tiger shoes performed well. Sales increased gradually, but something about the arrangement was fragile. Knight did not control the product he was building a company around. As Blue Ribbon Sports expanded, tensions with Onitsuka surfaced. Disagreements over territory, manufacturing commitments, questions of loyalty. At one point, Knight suspected that the Japanese company was exploring alternative US distributors behind his back. The uncertainty was destabilizing. Knight later described living in near constant anxiety during those early years. The company operated on thin margins. Expansion required credit. Banks were skeptical of a young distributor importing foreign running shoes. Cash flow was a recurring concern. Payroll was sometimes uncertain. Success did not remove fear, it intensified it. By the early 1970s, the break with Onitsuka became inevitable. Blue Ribbon Sports needed its own product line, not a distributed shoe, an original one. This was not a confident pivot, it was a forced one. They hired a graphic design student named Carolyn Davidson to create a logo. She was paid $35. The symbol she produced, a curved checkmark meant to imply motion, did not inspire immediate admiration from Knight. "I don't love it," he reportedly said, "but maybe it will grow on me." They renamed the company Nike, after the Greek goddess of victory. The mythology sounds poetic in hindsight. At the time, it was improvisation. Bowerman continued experimenting in his workshop. In one now famous moment, he poured rubber into his wife's waffle iron, searching for a lighter, grippier sole pattern. The result became the Waffle Trainer, a shoe that resonated with runners seeking performance advantages. But even breakthroughs carried risk. Knight relied heavily on debt to finance growth. He negotiated aggressively with banks, often stretching credibility. At one point, the company's survival felt dependent on convincing lenders that momentum justified faith. There were moments when Knight considered whether the pressure was worth it. He has described lying awake at night, calculating liabilities, imagining collapse. The public face of Nike would eventually become bold and fearless. The private early reality was cautious and strained. The shift from niche running brand to cultural force arrived later. In 1984, Nike signed a young basketball player named Michael Jordan. At the time, Nike was not dominant in basketball footwear. The company had built credibility among runners, but basketball belonged to competitors. The Jordan deal was unconventional and financially risky. It tied the brand's future to an unproven professional athlete. It blurred the boundary between athletic equipment and personal identity. The gamble worked. Air Jordan did more than sell shoes. It connected performance with aspiration. It transformed Nike from a performance company into a cultural presence. But that transformation was layered atop years of uncertainty. A runner selling shoes from his car. A coach dismantling prototypes in a workshop. A logo purchased cheaply. A partnership lost under strain. Debt negotiated in quiet offices. Nike feels permanent now. Its origin was precarious. The brand speaks of courage. The early years were marked by doubt. The swoosh represents motion forward. The beginning was a series of steps taken without guarantee. That is how it all began before the brand.